And we do have breaking news tonight. Meatball Ron officially in the race. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis moments ago announcing he is running for president. Took a little bit of time to finally launch the whole thing. It was a bit of a disaster on Twitter, but they worked it out. So does he have a shot at the GOP nom and the big White House? It has been the worst kept secret in politics for months. DeSantis has been running something of a shadow campaign, raising money, giving speeches, writing a book, visiting important states. But earlier today, the governor filed paperwork with the Federal Elections Commission. Then about an hour ago, his team joined Elon Musk and tried to make the big announcement on Twitter. Got off to a rocky start, let's say. Lots of tech issues. DeSantis and Elon kept dropping off. There was confusion everywhere, but they sort of restarted the link. And I've got some theories about what might have happened. I'll get into that with the panel. We are not legally allowed to play any of the audio clips from the event until it is totally over. But just prior to the show, DeSantis dropped this campaign video. Watch.
We held the line when freedom hung in the balance. We showed that we can and must revitalize America. We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
He looks great. All right, DeSantis joining an already crowded Republican field. He is the 8th so far to jump into the race. No rival matters more than former President Donald Trump, the 45th president, welcoming him with open arms. Just kidding. Trump writing on Truth Social, quote, Ron DeSantis can't win the general election or get the nomination because he voted to obliterate Social Security, even wanting to raise the minimum age to 70 or more, voted to badly wound Medicare and fought hard and voted for a 23% tax on everything, sales tax. He goes on. He was and is a disciple of horrible Rhino, Paul Ryan, and others, too many to mention. Also, he desperately needs a personality transplant, and to the best of my knowledge, they are not medically available yet. A disloyal person. Trump, of course, way ahead of the pack and DeSantis in most polls. Some political analysts say DeSantis may have waited too long to get into the race. That being said, can he springboard from the governor's mansion to the Oval Office? Let's break it down with tonight's man panel. Perfect for hump night. We've got the host of the Gary and Shannon Show on KFI AM 640 Los Angeles, Gary Hoffman, all smiles. Love to see it. And he's the host of the Richard Fowler Show. He is a Fox News contributor. He is Richard Fowler. And 2020 Libertarian vice presidential candidate. We don't know what the future holds, but he is the chair of youarethepower.net. Spike Cohen is back, and he looks serious, and I like it. All right, so I will start with you, Gary. We've never had a president from Florida, and Andy Jackson doesn't count because he was from a region that was not Florida when he ran for president.
Okay, well, we've also never had a president from Aruba. That doesn't mean, well, actually, that can never happen.
Exactly
based
right,
on
Gary.
the Constitution.
Well said.
I do want to congratulate Ticketmaster for their great rollout of the governor's announcement today. I thought that was pretty free of any problems, if you will. Now, listen. The problem with this is not that Ron DeSantis is Trump light, as a lot of people have been saying. He is Trump calm. He has a lot of the same policies that Donald Trump has been espousing. He just does it with complete sentences, and he does it with correct capitalization. There are things about Ron DeSantis that I think the primary voters are going to have to learn, maybe. Things about his family, things about his past, things about his military service that would serve him well to pull some of the support that Donald Trump has been enjoying so far. But this, in terms of a rollout for his campaign, I hope that the interviews that he does later tonight are a little smoother. I hope he's a little more relaxed. I hope he doesn't read his statement like he appeared to at the opening in this. But I don't know. Listen, I think he's a very viable candidate. I am one of those people who says the more candidates, the better. The more voices you have in this debate, the better. I just am not certain to this point if a rollout or if other campaign events like the one he has right now is enough to put him over Donald Trump.
I hope it's not a metaphor for the rest of his campaign, because there are things about him that I do like, Richard. Nikki Haley doesn't share my fondness. She says that he's mini Trump without the charm. Shots fired. Your thoughts, Richard Fowler?
Well, in the words of the late, great Tina Turner, I think from Nikki Haley's camp, just saying, what's love got to do with it? And God rest the queen and icon, Tina Turner.
Amen.
I'm having a tough day with that one. But on to this presidential race. Listen, here's where Donald Trump benefits in this sort of worldview that they're in. The more candidates that enter the race and dilute the field, the better chance Donald Trump has to keep his hold and stranglehold that he has with the Republican Party. I think today's botched rollout by DeSantis, hopefully it might get a little bit better as the night goes on, but it just shows that when it comes to production value, when it comes to showing you who can be the reality star in chief, Donald Trump is the winner of that one. And I think the ideal of the DeSantis campaign, which they said last week on a call with donors and some members of the press on that call, that he wants to run to the right of Donald Trump. I think that could present problems for him if he makes himself out of the primaries. When you get the general election, you get to a place like Michigan or Wisconsin, you're going to have some explaining to do about many of the laws that were passed in Florida, because those will land with a thud. In places like Michigan and Wisconsin.
He's pretty good at defending himself when people attack his record specifically. Spike, I don't know if you were able to listen, but I did appreciate two of the voices they brought into the discussion, and that was Jay Bhattacharya. He is the medical professor and economics professor from Stanford, who was ostracized for his COVID views as a medical expert during the pandemic, and also one of our very favorite titans of liberty from Capitol Hill, Kentucky Republican Congressman Thomas Massie. What were your thoughts on the successful part that you heard of the DeSantis forum?
Well, I think a very interesting thing is, first of all, let's be very clear. It's almost certain that the Republican nominee is going to be either Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. I think these are all, the rest of them are all also Rands. And I think a very interesting thing is the tactic that Trump seems to have taken to attack him on something that probably should be, I would hope, would be popular with Republican primary voters, which is reining in entitlements like Social Security and Medicare. But it kind of makes sense. You can't really attack him about anything else. You can't attack him about the lockdowns that he enforced, because Donald Trump was the guy with the 15 days to slow the spread sign that he held up next to Anthony Fauci. You can't attack him for enforcing red flag laws, because he's one of the champions of red flag laws. He can't attack Ron DeSantis for signing off on budgets that are double the budgets when he came into office, because Donald Trump spent and ran up more debt than any other president in one term to come before him. So I guess this is really all he can do, or maybe fall back to what he usually does, which is just calling him names, which has actually worked for him in the past. But Ron DeSantis can actually do quite a bit to attack Trump. Donald Trump rolled over to the FBI and the NSA and the ATF and the CDC and Anthony Fauci. He talked about draining the swamp, and he ended up being owned by the swamp during the 4 years he was in there. So if Ron DeSantis plays his card right and talks about Donald Trump's actual record, then this could be DeSantis' to win. But if history shows us, Trump's really good at just calling someone a name and then they lose against him.
And then backing away. Well, the timing of those pointed attacks still very much in question.